Awesome. Well, welcome everybody to the keynote speaker for computer science. This is Jeremy. He is the co-founder of Make School, and the floor is yours, Jeremy.
Thanks, Elias. Hi, everyone, and really excited to see you in this Zoom room, as that means that you are taking your weekend to develop valuable skills in a time where the easier thing to do would be to not show up on a weekend to a Zoom room for a hackathon. So I applaud you all. I figure in this keynote, I'll tell you a little bit of what I've learned having gone now to more than 100 hackathons and having a sense of what you could think about in terms of getting excited to push through this event, and as well how to make the most of it. So first off, I'd love to get a quick sense of who's in the audience. I know we have a few students here. Could you give me a reaction, any reaction, if you've been to a hackathon before today? All right. Sounds like we have a room full of first-time hackathon goers, which is super cool. Then my next question would be, please give me a reaction, any reaction, if you are somebody who has coded in some way, shape, or form for more than a year. All right. A bit of Java. Thanks, Justin. And then, all right, Rochelle. And then Niral's done some Python. Has anybody give me a reaction or ping something in the chat if you've never coded before? All right, so we have a mix. Well, let me tell you what I know from going to a bunch of hackathons, and to help you understand my perspective, I want to take you back to the world before hackathons. What was that world like? I actually went to one of the first ever college hackathons that ever existed. In 2013, there was an event organized at MIT that was the first ever Hack MIT. It drew like 50 people. You can imagine a few years later, these events started becoming 1,000-person plus events. So I saw the whole movement grow from 50 people to an event to 1,000 plus in a gymnasium to hackathons being small events on the internet again during the pandemic. And here's how it happened, and here's what you can learn from it. When hackathons were born, it was the dawn of a new era for young programmers, where you could actually learn how to build something that other people could use in some sort of real context. Now that sounds pretty basic. Like nowadays we all understand that there's apps out there made by teenagers. The #1 COVID tracking website in the country that was not built, that's not like a government website, was built by a 17-year-old in high school, right? And I want to take you back a little bit to what the world was like before then. So when I was in high school, I saw that transition point. When I was in high school, I should also ask, has anyone in this room heard me talk before who's a hackathon attendee? Just to make sure I don't recycle content. All right, great. So in the 2000s, if you were a teenager who wanted to learn how to program or wanted to code, you had to deeply, deeply believe that this was something that you were going to enjoy doing and take other people's word for it. Because if you wanted to get into coding in those years and you were going to ask the question, well, what is this useful for? We already knew in the 2000s that you could get a good job. That was already known. There was already tech companies that people knew about, were excited about, but there was nothing you could do today or tomorrow or this year or next year besides throwing up maybe a basic HTML page. But anything beyond that was really outside the reach of most high school students. What that meant was it's really hard to get excited about what you could build or do with computer science, because you have to imagine, well, okay, I have to study this in high school and college, sit in front of a computer for hours and hours and hours for this payoff that I don't even know if I really enjoy what this looks like at the other end, because there's no real way to experience it, or there was no real way to experience it until something fundamental changed, which was the arrival of accessible cloud hosting and the App Store. These two allowed for individuals like us, like you, even in a weekend, even with a few hours of study, to put something out there into the world that other people could experience that was interactive, that was more than just a web page with links to other web pages that were all static text, but something that did something for someone. You could have an idea about a simple utility and make it a reality and actually get it in the hands of other people. Today that sounds pretty basic, but What happened just at the turn of like 2009, 2010 is that the number of individual teenagers in high school and college who started to build things that actually solved real problems that real people had went through the roof, because all of a sudden there was a distribution network for them to actually get what they were building out into the hands of people who needed it. And that is why hackathons exist. Hackathons exist because of a movement towards democratizing access to distribution and the ability for you to leverage things that have already been built to do something impressive that actually solves a real problem. So let's talk about that for a second. When we, how many folks in the room think that one day they might want to work for a startup or start a company? Is that something that's interesting to anybody here? All right, you're all thinking about it. Maybe. Fair enough. So here's what I wish I knew. When I was in high school, because you couldn't actually build software that other people could end up using and find useful, you had to look out to the world to imagine why you should get excited for computer science. And if you looked out to the world, what you would see is you would see Google, you would see game companies, you would see Twitter was starting to take off, you know, and you would go, okay, so if I go into computer science, I have to be excited about games or social networks. There was also people starting to do a lot of coding and finance, which if folks have been following some of the latest news with Wall Street Bets, I can tell you one thing: a lot of programmers got very rich over the past month. And so, when you look at that, you get a certain lens of what tech could be. You imagine that tech is talking to computers to write code, to build social networks, do finance, or build video games, and that could not be further from the full spectrum of opportunities that tech actually can provide. The reason that coming to a hackathon on a weekend and learning how to code a bit is exciting is because you are living in an era where the power of the individual to build something that can actually have an impact on the world with code is infinitely larger than it was when I was in high school. And it doubles as a bunch of, or hackathon has a bunch of actually nice features. Not only does it let you build a skill that you can use to build things that solve real problems, it also allows you to build a skill that turns out to be the most skill job market, and get a sense for that this is something you want to study more as you go through your educational career. So let's go back to this question of, you know, I was asking a startup question. Are any of you interested in startups, or any of you interested in starting companies? When you think of people starting startups, you might also think of that same trifecta. People start social networks, Clubhouse, this new app is going viral these days. People start game companies. Oh my gosh, wouldn't it be fun to work on Fortnite? And, you know, recently people have become aware again, oh, right, people write code for finance because of the whole Wall Street Bets thing. But there is so much more than that. And so I want to take the opportunity for this keynote to get you thinking about what you could do with code, to give you ideas for what you could build in this hackathon, and motivation for why you should keep on learning this skill because of what it can do for you and what it can do for the world. So let's take some examples. In the 2000s, if you had an idea that you felt could have widespread appeal, let's take a simple one. You want to give farmers access to a dashboard that tells them which crops are ready to collect. All right, could put a little simple sensor out there, figure out when the crop is high enough to collect, beam it back to the main shed and tell the farmer, hey, this crop ready to go. This is products that in this realm exist today. But in the 2000s, you had a problem. There was no iPads, there was no iPhones, there was no smartphones, there was no Android. There was not really the same level of distributed cloud hosting we have today. Even if you had that idea as an individual, you wanted to build something for someone, there were so many barriers to getting it actually there. Just after 2010, these guys I know who grew up on a farm built software for their parents to do exactly this. And after 2010, this was finally possible. They could have some of it running on an iPad. They could host it in the cloud cheaply thanks to Amazon. They got it deployed. They had their parents use it. Turns out that was very useful. Turns out they started a company. They started selling it to other farmers. And next thing you know, they became a multi-$100 million company selling software that is so widespread that if you ate food today in the United States, probably a 50% chance some ingredient was grown on a farm that's their customer. You never think of, by the way, this has big implications for climate change too, because farming more efficiently means better use of resources, means less climate change. You would never think, oh my gosh, I want to learn how to code so I can build software for farmers, right? But multiply that by every single segment of our society that could improve. Whether that means improvement by serving people better, more efficiently, more climate friendly, more equitably, more ethically, there really isn't any limits. Every industry that you see, that you interact with in the world today, is going to be or already is being transformed by technology. This is true of your doctor's office, of the grocery store. This is true of public transportation and of cars. This is true of every single segment of society, from fashion to medicine. It does not matter where you look and where you try to find an island that is not actually the tech industry, it's there. And I want to go through a thought exercise with you to help you understand how you can be thinking about ideas and opportunities that may be hiding in plain sight. So let's think about Uber and Lyft, right? What is Uber and Lyft? Well, let's think about the world before Uber and Lyft. There was a time when there was no such thing as a taxi in a city. City doesn't have a taxi service. And some entrepreneur says, you know what, it'd be really great if you could pay somebody to drive you from point A to point B in this city. And the thing that made sense to them at the time was that they were going to paint some cars yellow, have them circulate in the city, and if you happened to catch one driving by that was yellow, that you would wave at them and they would stop and then take you where you wanted to go. Now, I can guarantee you that if taxis and Uber and Lyft did not exist today, and we had a hackathon, the only theme was to brainstorm transportation in cities, and somebody in this hackathon came up with a genius idea of paying somebody with a car to drive you from point A to point B, nobody in this Zoom room, no matter how long I gave you, well, especially not the students, right? None of you would ever think that the reasonable thing to do would be to say, well, here's how we're going to solve the problem. All right, we're going to paint some random cars yellow, and then when people in the city see a yellow car, they're going to wave at it, it's going to stop, and it's going to take us from point A to point B. None of you would ever think that was reasonable. Immediately, within a fraction of a second, if Uber, Lyft, taxis didn't exist and we had a brainstorming session to figure out what we should build, within 5 seconds, someone would chime in on the chat, would unmute, would go, hey, what if we built an app where you press a button and it sends a note to somebody who has a car and they come and they pick you up? Your first instinct would be, well, hey, let's build an app, right? Now that one already exists, so now it's obvious. It's kind of one of those ideas that's no longer hiding in plain sight because people built companies around it that are now worth billions of dollars. But there are so many things that we interact with every single day in this world that make as much sense as painting random cars yellow and waving at them does, because they were built, conceptualized, designed at a time when we did not have the resources we have today. And why is this interesting? Uber and Lyft fundamentally are very complicated applications because they operate in so many different cities with so much, complex matchmaking they have to do between all the people who want rides and all the people who have cars. But in the very, very early days, if you were, let's say, on a high school campus and you wanted to just build a service that could help your friends get rides, and Uber and Lyft and stuff didn't exist, the fundamental functionality of let's keep a list of all people with cars, let's keep a list of all the people who want rides. If they press a button saying they want to ride from point A to point B, it sends a little text message or notification to somebody who has a car. That functionality can be built in a weekend by a high school student who's gone to a few hackathons, who studied a little bit of coding. That is a weekend high school student project. The minimum viable, simple prototype version of Uber and Lyft, which is a multi-billion-dollar idea, is something that you can build in a weekend as a high school student. And maybe not today in this hackathon, but certainly after a few hackathons, after coding on your own, going through some tutorials online, this is within reach for a high school student. And that's why hackathons are a thing, because when I was in high school, it was not in reach. There was no way that you could do that. There was no path. No matter how clever you were, it could not be done by a high school student. And that's essentially why we're here today. A movement was born that allows you to build the skills and tools to develop simple products and services for fun that can actually solve a problem that can turn into a multi-billion-dollar idea. And what I want you to be doing as you go through this hackathon and as you think about why is it worth continuing to invest your time in learning how to code and finding more hackathons? If you look online, there's high school hackathons happening around the country every single weekend. If this is a good experience for you and you want to do it again next weekend, there are high school hackathons every single weekend. What I want you to be thinking about is what around you in the world is being done as stupidly as the idea of painting a bunch of random cars yellow in a big city and have them drive around so you can wave at them and have them stop for you. There is stuff that you interact with in your everyday life that is done in a way that you, if you just went from zero and went, wait a second, how would I build this from scratch? You would never think to do it the silly way that it's being done today. Let me give you another example. I had a student, actually, I think, Jordan, you might know this student, Josh Archer. Josh Archer built software when he was at Make School for the nursing home that his grandmother was in. If you fast forward to the phase of your life where you might end up in a nursing home, you're elderly, you need daily care, you decide to move into a nursing home so that you can have that. You might have family, you might have kids, grandkids. Wouldn't you want to have a way for them to know how you were doing, especially if you were potentially sick, or in the case of this student, if you had dementia, and so maybe you weren't able to be the one to communicate? Well, of course. And actually, he could build, and he did build, very, very straightforward software that made it such that when grandma ate her meal and had a good time, they could press a button and he could get a notification. When she had a good moment, they could snap a picture and it would, through the app, send it over. If there was an issue, they could ping. But this allowed him to feel so much more in touch because they're, somebody he knows and loves is the nursing home. And now there's a feed of how they're doing with photos. This is something that if you all needed to start a nursing home today, you would obviously include some functionality that was app-based, web-based to help families keep in touch. It would make perfect sense to you, right? You'd probably try to integrate something so that they could play video games together and do a whole bunch more. But that's not how it's done today. Another example from the medical field. In a lot of hospitals, doctors and nurses still keep track of important medical information for patients who are in intensive care on paper clipboards. And several 100,000 people die in the United States every year, even pre-pandemic, due to medical errors in hospitals. And a lot of those errors are due to the fact that things are being done in ways that you would never reinvent the same way, because you would go, oh, duh, that should be, I don't know, an iPad app. Because if somebody dies because the doctor scribbled a dose of a medication and then the next doctor who came to take over the next shift read it and got the number of zeros wrong because the handwriting sucked and killed someone, which really happened, times thousands of times, tens of thousands of times every single year, you would go, wait a second, well, what if we just built a simple app that like checked the number against a database, and if it was too high, then we would just throw an error and say, hey, no, don't give that dose of medication. That would be very obvious to you. There are obvious billion-dollar problems hiding in plain sight in our society every single day. And there are obvious billion life improved problems hiding in plain sight in our society because we have not yet fully transitioned to taking advantage of all of the opportunities that the technology around us theoretically could unlock for us. Like, we hit the Candy Crush stage, the social game stage of development, but we haven't gotten yet to the utopia stage where we like fixed fundamental problems in society, right? And so whether your vision for yourself is to be someone who builds a big business or has a lot of success in a certain field you're passionate about, like medicine, or somebody who really wants to just figure out how they can make the most positive impact in the world, the people who are going to succeed at any one of those things in your adult lives, the people 15 years from now that you're going to look at and go, whoa, I went to school with that person and now they're doing this, those people are all going to be doing it in some way, shape, or form because of code, with code, augmented by code, aided by code. There is no version of that, whether it's somebody who is revolutionizing access to clean water in a developing country to somebody who builds a multi-billion-dollar business in the United States, all of them are going to be doing it better, faster because of code. And so this is my call to you. You are now a little bit less than a decade in to a movement that started in about 2012, 2013, when teenagers realized that they had the power to learn a skill that let them turn an idea about how to solve a problem into a reality, maybe not to the level that a company with thousands of engineers could, but to a level that could change lives or solve a problem or make you slightly happier or give a moment of joy to another individual. Whatever your scale is, all of it is possible. Again, largest COVID tracker in the US was built by a 17-year-old, right? So this is, you're at the tail end, at the tail end of a decade of this movement. It's going to be 10 years soon. And what you should know is that ultimately the most powerful thing you can do is to be thinking of something that is the intersection between what you can build based on your skills and what is actually going to be used by someone else. And so let's break that down first. If you feel like, well, that's silly, I can't build anything. You may be, not believing in yourself enough, but you may also be right today. And that's why hackathons are also a really, really great opportunity to learn. Because what is one of the biggest challenges in learning in the past decade? Let me tell you, as somebody who runs a school, the biggest challenge is to find a way to get people to focus on learning a singular thing for several hours in a row. When you have, Reddit in one on the phone, with YouTube in another tab, with TikTok, ready to multitask to, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera, it can be real hard. And then plus school is, you got your English homework and then your history homework and then your science homework, and it's all mixed in. To be able to focus on one thing, and coding really benefits from this, by the way, when you learn it, to be able to focus on one thing for many, many hours is super, super beneficial. So first off, if you're coming into this, you're like, wait a second, I don't know how to build anything, and maybe I've never even coded before. That's actually awesome. You're also entering the best context in which to learn and get better. If you spend the entirety of a hackathon just following online tutorials and committing to them and learning a new thing, that is a valid use of a hackathon. And another feature about a hackathon is that you get to do it with other people who are doing the same thing. You can tag team it, you can keep each other accountable, and it's just way more fun and focused that way. So if you heard me say, okay, the thing that you can do is the intersection of what you can build and what people are actually going to use, and you're like, well, that's cute, but I can't build anything. But don't worry. Spending a hackathon, your first, second, third hackathons, entirely learning, totally valid. The second is, okay, well, let's say you can build something. What is the biggest challenge of a hackathon? Picking an idea that is small enough that you can finish it, which is kind of nuts if you think about all that I've been saying. It sounds very like, think big, solve global problems. So now why am I saying, okay, well, your biggest challenge in the hackathon is to pick an idea that's small enough? The most world-changing concept that the world has ever seen is meaningless if it's never finished and shipped. And a hidden skill that maybe you don't realize is important that you actually learn at hackathons is how to ship things. Shipping is the tech industry term for launching a product. Have you shipped? It's like, okay, well, did you launch the thing? And it turns out that there's a whole bunch of really talented people in this world who are underperforming relative to their potential to impact the world because they're not very good at shipping. They could be brilliant programmers, but if you can't ship, it doesn't matter. And this is such an important aspect to being a good programmer, to being a good, frankly, anything in business that involves having to actually launch a product, that companies are really impressed. Like when you all end up in college and you're going for those first internships, to have shipped something during a high school hackathon, no matter how simple, is impressive because so many students have trouble scoping an idea appropriately, bite off more than they can chew, don't finish it, and then it's not demoable. It's not a thing that they finished, they did not ship. Now, that's going to happen to all of you at some point. That's probably going to happen to most of you in any given hackathon. But that doesn't mean that we shouldn't strive to pick something that we can ship. Because once we ship something, our world changes. All of a sudden, your confidence is super boosted because you're like, oh, right, I know what it means to have an idea, and then to say it's done, and then to stop and to put it out there and be like, all right, I can iterate on it. Maybe I can make version 1.1, but if I move on to the next project, I know that this first one is done. It's usable, it's functional. I shipped it. And when that moment first happens in your life, all of a sudden you get incredibly better at estimating the next time around what it takes to actually finish the next idea. You start organizing your ideas based on how feasible they are to do, and you start shipping more and more because you get better at scoping your ideas. And eventually that has a large impact in how much impact you're going to have on the world, because the amount of things you're going to get out there is going to increase. For somebody, in high school, this might sound kind of ridiculous, but like, it is not uncommon to have people study computer science in high school, major in it in college, get a job that involves writing code, and enter their late 20s not having shipped something. I have a cousin, and she was a software engineer who worked for 9 years for the same company. And they had a lot of funding to kind of mess around and never shipped anything. They never launched a thing. 9 years. And this is kind of what I mean by the before and after. When I was in high school, even if I had the skills that I'm telling you to develop, I couldn't have shipped anything. I didn't have the tools. The tools weren't there. The infrastructure wasn't there. There was no app store. There was no way that a high school student could do it. If the pandemic happened when I was in high school, that chance that the best pandemic tracker would be built by a 17-year-old, that'd be very, very unlikely. So now it's actually possible, but that possibility also opens up the risk of biting off more than you can chew. And it's not just a student problem, it's actually a professional problem. Such a professional problem that is very impressive when students have done it. And it really gives you a massive leg up in the job search process, and gives you a massive leg up in your ability to just get on a roll with things. So if you don't feel like you can build enough and you want to commit to learning, that's totally fine. There's so many great tutorials out there. If you want to build something, then actually the smallest idea that still does something there's no shame in that, because the next idea can also be built off of that one. Oftentimes what you'll end up doing in the next project is you'll plagiarize from your previous project. You'll go to the code from the previous project that you shipped, so you know it works, and you'll rip out some of the internals and reuse them for the second one, secretly getting a head start. Even if the second idea is very different from the first idea, there'll always be some overlap. Oh, a form. Well, I have a working form over there. Oh, a login system. Well, I have a login system over there. And next thing you know, the first thing you shipped, that code can end up rippling through your future projects, because the stability that something that you launch that is done gives you is really, really powerful. So the change the world stuff is great, but the way that you get there is by shipping. And that's actually one of the fundamental skills that you try to practice at a hackathon. How can I think of an idea that solves a real problem, that is a real thing that people could use, that is like impactful, and that is small enough that I can finish it? And it's okay sometimes to have deliberate scope, a vision to say, hey, well, I'm only going to get this much done in the hackathon, and then I'll do the rest later. But nonetheless, it's so good to learn about yourself. Like, how good are you at predicting how long things take? It's very hard to tell in a modern world, because you can always make excuses for why it could have gone faster. You're like, well, I did take a long time to write that essay, but I did get really distracted between TikTok and YouTube and Reddit. So theoretically I could write essays really fast. It's just that I was distracting myself. But a hackathon gives you a chance to really tune into that. Like, okay, no, but really, when I have an idea and I want to build a thing, like, how long does it really take me? And most people estimate wrong, and that's totally normal. And you get better and better at it over time. So if I was to recap, so far, especially because I noticed some new people arrived, in the early 2010s, the world shifted, and what an individual could build with technology and distribute technology became infinite times more powerful. To the degree that at a hackathon, you could build the MVP of something like Uber or Lyft, you could build the MVP of all kinds of software that mimics or maps to what are now really tremendously powerful companies or nonprofits that are having a big impact in the world. Because of that change in the early 2010s, technology has exploded as an industry, but it's not what you think. It's not just Google, Apple, Netflix, and so on. It is companies in every single corner of the world, nonprofit, for-profit, fashion, medicine, doesn't matter. Everyone is using technology to make the world a better place or to make more money, but it's all tech-based. And you all can start practicing the skills that build up towards that, the ability to take an idea, design a product, and build it in a hackathon. That's what you're here to do today. So now let me take all that prelude and end with my Hackathon Commandments. So these have been developed from, again, having gone to more than 100 hackathons. The Hackathon Commandments are these. Number one, never feign ignorance. So what does that mean? Never feign ignorance. Simple way of phrasing that would be, don't pretend act surprised. Why am I saying that? When you're at a hackathon, it can be a really, really rough environment if you're used to benchmarking yourself compared to other people. Because let me tell you, when I was an MIT student and I was going to hackathons, sometimes, you know, there's a 13-year-old who blows you out of the water, right? There's always someone who's going to make you feel like, oh my gosh, I'll never be as good as that person. But what I've learned over the years, I've been at this now in education for more than a decade, is that those differences seem much, much larger than they are. When I got to college, I learned that a bunch of computer science majors in the US, a double-digit percentage of them, very, very common, people who are in college to major in computer science, a large percentage will never have coded before making it to college. So what that means is you arrive in college and like there's people majoring in computer science at MIT when I was there and who had never coded before. You think that they look around and they got super intimidated, and they did, because when you get to MIT as a freshman, there's some high school students who just, you know, like people who are so much better, you go, oh my gosh. 4 years later at graduation, the ranking was totally flipped. People who had never coded before, just before enrolling at MIT, by the time they graduated, were genius coders. And yet at that time, it was super, super intimidating. So what do I mean by don't pretend, act stupid? Don't pretend, act surprised. When somebody tells you, what is this? Don't say, what? You've never heard of Python? What? You've never heard of JavaScript? What? You've never heard of our Lord and Savior Node.js? People love to act that way, kind of for fun, but it can be super intimidating to folks who you don't know. 4 years from now, they could be teaching you how to code. So commandment number one, don't pretend, act surprised, don't feign surprise. When somebody tells you about something they don't know, here's the response. Be excited that you get to be the first person in the world to teach them. That's the attitude you need. And commandment number two, and then we'll wrap up the talk. Commandment number two is find somebody at this hackathon and agree with them to meet up on Zoom sometime in the next 7 days to continue coding. A hackathon is an all-weekend extravaganza. That's great. But you know what else really gets results? Consistent, regular work. And if you emerge from this event with a calendar event with somebody else, you don't even have to know exactly what it's going to be. It's going to be an hour on Zoom, and we're going to code. A tutorial or hackathon project, we're going to continue it. I don't care what it is. But you set that calendar event. You say, okay, at this time, we will do this for an hour. And you do that every week. You will be among those who reap the rewards that I'm talking about, who are able to build the skills that I'm talking about, who are going to make the most of this event. So number one, don't pretend to act surprised. Number two, find somebody, schedule time, and actually make this recurring practice. To end, I'll post a link in the Discord in the chat for the Make School Discord. Make School is a new college in San Francisco. We have a bachelor's program in applied computer science that you could go to for college if you were interested in learning how to code. Our whole thing is being project-based, and we love mentoring high school students. So we have a Discord community that you can join where folks can get advice and help from current students, alums, and other folks in the Make School community. And we're all about helping coders solve their problems, debug, figure out where to learn, and make whatever progress they want to do. So it's a great place to hang out. And a great place to get help also if you're ever stuck on something. So that's the invite link there if you want it. I'll hand it back over to the organizers. Thank you so much for listening.